So this week's portion begins with the story of Yaakov going now back home. Vayishlach, this is the portion of Vayishlach. He's going back home, and the first thing that he has to do, he has to go back and make up with his brother Esav. So the portion begins, Vayishlach Yaakov malachim al Esav. Yaakov sends angels or messengers to Esav, and he goes and asks him to please to rekindle their friendship and their brotherhood. And there's a story that in the beginning of the portion is like this. The story is that Yaakov has his family cross over the Nar Yavok, this river, and then the Torah tells us like this: Vayivasar Yaakov levado. Yaakov remained alone. Vayavek ish imay ad ales hashachar, and this man struggled with him until the morning, which is very perplexing because it says Vayivasar Yaakov levado. The Yaakov was left alone, which suggests that no one else is there. And then there's someone that's struggling with him and battling with him. And this is the famous episode where Yaakov struggles with something or someone and then is injured in the process. And then in the morning comes this something, leaves him, and he goes then and eventually encounters his brother. So we have to understand what is exactly occurring here, that Yaakov is reaching out to his brother, and before he can finally reach his brother, he has some type of struggle, some type of battle, and through overcoming this battle, he's eventually able to reach his brother. Then the next interesting thing is that afterwards, after that night, it says, the Torah tells us like this: Vayishtachu arza sheva pamim. When Yaakov sees and he's coming closer to Esav the next morning, it says that he bows down 7 times, ad gishtoi ad achiv, until he reaches his brother. Again, a redundancy, ad, until he reaches his brother. So on the one level, the question is, since when does a human being bow down to another human being? Which the Zohar asks. We're going to get into this in a moment. And also, why does it say that he bows down 7 times until he reaches his brother? And when they finally reaches his brother, the Zohar says, when they finally reaches, they both embrace and they kiss each other and they weep. So there's sort of a making up of these two brothers. So understand a little bit what this process is, from Yaakov sending out angels to having some type of struggle to eventually bowing down to his brother and then encountering him, what this represents. So Yaakov and Esav, the Zohar in this week's portion begins telling us that Vayishlach Yaakov malachim, Yaakov sends angels. Rabbi Yehuda says, Rabbi Yehuda starts and begins and says that every person is born with a Yetzer Hara, which literally translated is a negative inclination, and then then eventually, at a certain point of time, a person receives also what is called a Yetzer Tov, a good inclination. So the Zohar, and then later the Ari, see Yaakov and Esav as an embodiment, qualities of Yetzer Hara, negative inclination, and Yetzer Tov, positive inclination. So let's just understand this. When Yaakov is left alone, Vayivasar Yaakov levado, and he's encountering Ish, and he's having a struggle with this person, the classic interpretation is he's fighting with the Sar, the prince of Esav, which can be understood both as an objective battle, something that he's fighting, something outside of himself, but it can also be understood deeply that he's struggling with his own inner Esav. In order for him to re-encounter his brother, Yaakov asks himself a very fundamental question. Yaakov leaves his father's home as a very peaceful person. He's a Yoshev Ol, he's a man of the tents. He goes through this process of the last week's portion. He accumulates a lot of wealth. He has many wives, lots of children. He looks himself in the mirror and says, who am I now? Am I still the same? And I'm coming home now. Am I still the same person that left? Am I coming home the same person? Or have I completely transformed myself into something that's unrecognizable? So Yaakov struggles with his own personal Esav. Yaakov representing the good inclination, struggling with his negative inclination. And I don't mean this in a way that's negative, but in terms of the ego, that this represents the ego. There's a part of ourself that's transcendent and desires only spirituality and things that are lofty, and there's a part of self that's very imminent and desires things of the body, food and eating and drinking, whatever it needs to sustain its own existence. So there's an inner struggle within Yaakov himself, and he's battling himself, asking, am I the person of the transcendence, or have I also become the embodiment of the person that has physical needs and desires those physical needs? So there are two stages here. The first stage is the recognition that there are two different forces within the human being. And this is an important recognition, because most times people say, I don't want to be a hypocrite. I do good. Okay, I'm going to say from now on, for the next 30 days, or for the next year, I'm going to make a resolution and I'm going to tell the truth. I'm going to be an honest person. And then one day they slip. So they say, you know what, I slip. I'm really not honest. Might as well not be honest. But if you recognize that there are two vying forces within you, there's a part of you that's pure and transcendent. There's a part of you that's just ego-based. And you understand that it's a constant struggle. That in itself eliminates the concept of hypocrisy, because I'm trying my best. I'm working on perfecting my good self. And I'm struggling with my negative. And I'll overcome it. So even though I stumble, it's not one me that's stumbling. It's part of me that's stumbling. But part of me always remains pure. And therefore I can overcome that negativity. That's the first stage. Then there's something that goes deeper than that. Yaakov struggles with that inner inclination. At the end of the night, meaning when the sun is rising, which represents when things are becoming clear, he finally sees that he doesn't have to struggle. It's not a battle, this or that. There's a way to include both his lower self in the context of his higher self. So he turns to his negative self, which is embodiment of the quality of Esav, and says, Barcheni, bless me. I want to receive you. You don't exist as an independent being. Him telling him his own self. You're part of me. And you feed my ego, which allows me to survive, which allows me to eat and to drink and to have a family and to make money, to do whatever I have to do to exist in a physical self. And that's okay. I want to welcome you. I want you to bless me. So when he can integrate that level of self into a holy context, then he's ready to reach his brother. Because now, as the Torah says, he bows down 7 times. So the Zohar says that the bowing down of 7 times is the bowing down to the Shekhinah. So Yaakov is bowing down to the physical Esav, but as the Torah says, ad gishtoi ad achiv, until he reaches his brother. What the Torah is saying is, he's trying to reach the brother within him. He doesn't want to see Esav as an enemy any longer. He's tired of the battle. He's saying, inwardly he's saying, I have struggles within myself, and I know there are different forces within me, but I want to see the different forces not as forces that are enemies to each other, but the forces that have the positive quality, even in something that seems to be negative, until I can find the brother within my own negativity, the brother within my ego. What does that actually translate? That translates into another form of inner transformation. Because on one level of transformation, you're saying, I know deeply that my higher self is spiritual, is pure, is holy, is noble, desires only things that are perfect. My lower instincts push me into the direction that's negative. So I make a choice. I say, I want to be this person and not that person. And I struggle with this. The higher recognition that Yaakov has is, it doesn't have to be a struggle anymore, because your lower self can also bless you, can be a source of blessing. There's a brother within that lower quality. There's a brother, meaning there's a positive quality, a positive energy, even what seems to be the negative self. Because the ego is not purely negative, it's also an angel. And it was created. There's angels that surround us. This is one of the angel qualities that we have. The ego. The negativity of the ego is when the ego leads to evil. When it's just about the self and the self alone, then it just becomes about me and not someone else, and then I destroy the other person in order to survive. The trick is to take the ego and make it more transparent. Not to eliminate the ego, but the transparency of the ego, that the ego exists. And I do have physical desires, and I have certain needs, but to understand that even my needs that are physical, I can put them within a context of my spiritual self, of my transcendent self, and then I can receive blessing from all my levels of self. And that's the powerful message of this week's portion.